Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Premium Podcast, where I, Big Italy 42, and Christopher Ruckus at Space Jam 23 DFS are discussing DraftKings and FanDuel cash game strategies for tonight's MLB action, starting at 7:05. And we've got a nice slate of games here. We've got a weird 6 o'clock game if you want to play that. But if you want to be in any of the big tournaments, you're going with the 7 o'clock start. And DraftKings specifically has a $27 tournament with $50K to first place. So that's where a lot of my action will be going tonight. So without further ado, you ready to get things kicked off here?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right, so we're going to give you the rundown first of a couple FanDuel lineups we made. Then we're going to go to some DraftKings ones and give you a quick overview if you're new to cash games. What you want to get is your stability. You want to get a high floor, players that you don't need necessarily a high ceiling. You need the guys that aren't going to kill you, the guys that put the ball in play, the guys who get on base, the guys who hit high in the order, the pitchers who are big favorites in good matchups, et cetera, et cetera. You want to make sure that, your team may not score 70 points that would win a GPP, but if you score 30 to 35, you're in great spot in your cash games. So we're going to give you the breakdown here. I'm going to start off with my pitcher. We'll go back and forth between my pitcher, your pitcher, and position by position. We'll discuss. So on FanDuel, where you only get one starting pitcher, you got to make the right decision. And if you watched our earlier podcast, there are 3 top options today. And my top option of the day is Matt Harvey. So I got Matt Harvey into my cash game lineup. He's the most expensive pitcher on the board, $9,900. A couple of guys are a little bit cheaper, but matched up against an aging Phillies lineup. Their best hitter, Chase Utley, really struggling. Generally a perennial fast starter, so some legitimate cause for concern there. And Matt Harvey was on a pitch count last time, his first time out, opposing Strasburg. Went 6 innings, 4 hits, a walk, 9K. So, the guy's in a great spot today, and it's really hard to not at least consider him in your cash games.
No, so I'm considering him. I did not play him. So I actually went with the Carlos Carrasco route. That's going to be probably unanimous pitcher number 2. If personally he's cheaper than Arrieta, and I'm taking him over Arrieta, probably 100% out of 100% times for same price. So tonight, Carrasco, I can't get away from him. I mentioned this early, 2.42 xFIP versus righties, 2.92 versus lefties. The guy's a monster without the name. So a huge Carrasco fan tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on board with you there. He's my number 2 pitcher as well. So as you can see, we're kind of giving you a little bit of both sides. So if I'm not using Harvey, Carrasco is going to be the other guy I'm using. And I'm moving on to catcher here, where you mentioned earlier, I'm of the same thinking. You want to try to get yourself a value catcher where you can, especially if you're paying up for Harvey and another guy we're going to mention here in a minute. So I went with Tuffy Gosewich. He's got a fair lineup spot, usually batting around 6th in the order, and not an ideal scenario, but he's absolute min salary. He's a decent hitter, and that's obviously subject to change, as I'm pretty sure yours will be as well. I'm just going to be looking for a catcher that's in a good spot, that's cheap, so I can fit my big pitcher, my at least one big bat, and a little bit of balance elsewhere.
Yeah, no, completely. Catcher's really easy for me. So I plugged in Anthony Recker, kid's got power, home run potential, 2,200. If he is out, I am just going to pivot to the $2,200 catcher that's in the best position and in the lineup.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. And moving on to first base, this is probably going to be the consensus for not only us, but most people on their cash game lineups today. Miguel Cabrera, absolutely locked in. He's expensive at $5,300, but if he keeps hitting the way he does, your cash games, your head-to-heads, hits a home run, couple doubles, whatever it may be, you're going to have yourself behind pretty quickly. So for me, Miguel Cabrera is a lock.
Yeah, sadly for our viewers, I did go Miguel Cabrera as well, just because it makes sense. His price tag is expensive. I'm looking to try to find a pivot in our cash games for first base. No, it is very difficult because he is an elite play at first base. If I was pivoting and need to save money, I would likely be pivoting to a Edwin Encarnacion or Anthony Rizzo type play. And those would be my only 2 pivots. Obviously, high risk, but I've got Miguel Cabrera.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's the one lock, the guy you really need in your cash games outside of an elite pitcher. And if I was going to go down and I need to save some money, I wouldn't mind Freddie Freeman. You don't like the lineup around him, but it's not a bad matchup for him at home there and at 3,600. But like we said, I'll say it again, I think Miguel Cabrera is the one player you really need to have in your cash games today. Moving on here to second base, where there's one player in particular really underpriced still, despite a good lineup spot and a solid matchup tonight against Brad Peacock, who pretty terrible against lefties and righties, over 350 WOBA allowed to both. So last season, making his first start of the year this year, and I don't expect it to go well for him. So I'm locking in Ben Zobrist at $3,100. Really nice discount for him on FanDuel compared to DraftKings and some other sites. So I think that one's another, not quite a no-brainer, but a pretty easy decision for me.
Yeah, you're much nicer than me because I say it is a no-brainer. Plug in Ben Zobi at second base. The position's not great. I mean, you're getting 1,300 in savings from Kinsler down to Zobrist. I mean, enough said. 900 savings from D. Gordon. Plug in Zobrist, plug in Cabrera, get your starting pitcher, and that's how you're starting your lineups tonight.
Yep, completely agree there. And moving on to third base, where there's a guy that we talked about yesterday on some podcasts and had himself a nice day, and he's the very last player you'll see at third base, cheap as it possibly gets, $2,200, Yangervis Solarte. I'm taking him once again today, and his matchup at home against Trevor Cahill. I'm a big fan of Solarte, especially if he's batting second again. Big bats behind him, absolute minimum salary. Even if he doesn't do anything, he's not going to kill your lineup at that price.
No, and he lets you fit the big bats that are going to make your lineup. So I'd rather take a Solarte Miggy combo than say drop down to Freddie Freeman and be able to get, a shortstop that's 2,800, 3K. It just makes no sense. So it comes down to, do you want Elvis Andrus and Freddie Freeman or Miguel Cabrera and Solarte? No brainer right there. I love Solarte tonight. And, he's in mine as well. I feel bad. We're 3 for 3 in picks.
Well, hey, you know what? We went a different pitcher, different catcher. So I think we'll be different here at shortstop. And this is a tentative selection with obviously no lineups out yet. And bats second in the order, sometimes the switch hitter. Jose Ramirez for the Indians. He's sitting at $2,700 on FanDuel. I'm not saying that he's a lock, but if he is in that 2-hole and I don't see any better values pop up, the guy's got some upside. Already with a home run and a couple stolen bases. Granted, they were both in the same game this year, but if he's batting the 2-hole, he's going to be right ahead of Brantley, Kipnis, Santana, all those big bats. And against Jose Quintana, he's an average pitcher, but a contact pitcher, which is perfect for this Cleveland Indians lineup. So I'm not going out of my way to avoid Jose Ramirez, especially if he's in a nice spot.
Yeah, no, so love Jose. Had to be a little bit different for you guys. So I went Wilmer Flores. I'm actually a huge fan of the Mets tonight. I said it earlier. He's cheap, 2,400. Obviously, his lineup position isn't going to be great. But for me, I've got two options. Troy Tulowitzki, punt. Right now, Wilmer Flores, he projects well for myself. So I'm going to plug in Wilmer at 2,400. There's a couple pivots we have based on, what might come on. Marwin Gonzalez is one that comes to mind for me tonight. Just got to watch lineups.
Yeah, and Marcus Simeon's another one around that price tag. If you've got $2,800, you don't love his lineup spot, but the guy's been hitting well. I mean, he's got 4 multi-hit games already this year, a home run in his last game. You're obviously not chasing the home run with him there, but trying to get yourself a little bit of stability. You've got another guy like a Jed Lowry, who got the day off yesterday, a little bit of rest, so he should be nice and rejuvenated at 2,800 again today. He's got a couple homers on the season as well. All right, moving on here to the outfield where there are a ton of options, but like we said, if you're paying for Harvey, you're paying for Cabrera, you're going to have to make some sacrifices somewhere. So I tried to go with some balance in my outfield here in this lineup. I went with Anthony Goes at $3,400 to start things off. A.J. Burnett, a 350 WOBA allowed to lefties. Goes has been the leadoff guy for Detroit, and he's been phenomenal so far this season. In his first 3 games this year, 3 hits, 2 hits. Just 1 for 6 over his last 2 games, but that 1 hit was a home run. Huge bats behind him. I expect Detroit to get to A.J. Burnett today, and I have no problem with slotting Ghost in there with run, hit, home run upside, and all those big bats behind him.
Yeah, I started with Michael Kadire. I'm going to continue my New York Mets trend. If you look at his stats this year, the guy's getting on base. FanDuel, you get negative points for it. He's only got 1 negative game this year. 3.25, 1.25, 7.25, 4.5. The guy gets on base. I like everyone around him. So Kadire was my first and cheapest outfielder.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We've got Travis Snyder at $3,200 is another guy that I'm looking at. It is a lefty-lefty matchup, which you don't love, but his numbers against left-handed pitching last year were astounding. 238 ISO, 458 WOBA. CC Sabathia on the tail end of his career. I'm not concerned about him at all, and I will be targeting him today.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Who you got in your second spot?
So speaking of targeting CC Sabathia, I guess Steve Pearce is going to be the next one in my lineup. I'm a huge fan of Steve Pearce tonight against CC. I mean, talk about home run upside potential. I think his floor is high because of the matchup. Love everything about the Orioles tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that as well. I would love to get myself some Adam Jones tonight, but he's pretty expensive. It's going to be really hard to fit him in with a Harvey and a Cabrera today. So a little bit pricey, but definitely a great way to go. One of my favorite plays if you can get him in there. And with my last one, I'm going with safety again, and it's Nick Markakis at $3,000 for Atlanta. Been batting in the heart of the order. He's got a fine matchup against Big Salad, Tom Kohler tonight. Not a ton of upside. I mean, he's got a little bit above average ISO for his career. But what you're liking here with Nick Markakis is his batting spot in the order right behind Freddie Freeman. Should be there once again today. He gets on base, walked twice in his last game. So he gives you some stability, and very rarely is he going to have those over 5 games. He puts the ball in play, and he's a patient hitter who gets on base. So that's a perfect scenario there for me in cash games.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I do agree with you. Because I have, some safety in our lineups and all of that, I also have some punts. So when I punt a couple positions, I like to make sure I'm punting for solid pitcher, one, and then that stud play of the day, so Miguel Cabrera. I always, when I have those punts, I like to bring in a player that's, got a good floor, but also has a big upside. And mentioned him yesterday, Jorge Soler. The kid's, he's confident right now. He's hitting the ball well. I love his matchup. I just love everything about this young kid this season. I mean, he's had two bad games, and then the rest of the games, he's putting up big positive numbers. 15.5 spot last night, 4.5 the other night. I mean, I love Soler tonight for the upside to balance off, those punts that I did have to take.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we said, I mean, I don't really feel comfortable paying down for any of these pitchers here, especially with just one pitcher. I want to get myself some stability. And that Matt Harvey, Carlos Carrasco, guys like that definitely provide that for you. So obviously some things subject to change with when lineups come out here in a little bit, in a few hours. This is late morning, I should say, that we're recording this. So we'll definitely be checking that out, monitoring that as we move on. And with that, we're going to move over to DraftKings and talk about some cash game lineups. And I'll tell you this, I found it a lot easier to fit some big names into my DraftKings lineup tonight than I did on FanDuel. How about you?
Yeah, completely. I feel like the ratio from pitcher price as well, it's a little bit less on DraftKings versus the other players.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start things off here, I'm going to give you both my pitchers, then you can come back with your 2 pitchers, but won't be surprised if they're exactly the same. Matt Harvey, Carlos Carrasco. You got Harvey at $9,300, Carrasco at $88. Great price for both guys. I find it really easy to fit these guys in, also with some bats that I want.
Wow, you're not rolling Nick Martinez and Kendall Graveman tonight at pitcher on DraftKings? I mean, come on, guys. It's a very simple cash game play. These guys, assuming, are both going to be probably 6. Yeah, it depends. Arrieta creates a little bit of controversy for it. I'm guessing it's going to go Harvey 60%, and then the rest of the 40% field will likely be split between Carrasco and Arrieta. Do your best to get Carrasco in your lineup. I'm just going to say that now. I think he's a little bit better spot tonight than Arrieta. I'm a huge Carrasco believer, and he didn't disappoint the first night.
Yeah, and full disclosure here, I'll say this: when I'm making my GPP lineups today, I'm getting creative with my hitters. I'm not getting that creative with my pitchers because I don't feel comfortable with most of these cheap guys. So most of my lineups, especially the duos on DraftKings, will be a variation of those top 3 guys, and mixed in there will be a little bit of Shane Green because he's got a great price tag at DraftKings at just $5,800. Slight underdog, but I like his numbers there. Not saying he's a cash game play necessarily, but, if you decide to just completely load up your lineup, you can go that route, but I don't think that's the way to go today. I'm paying up for pitching in cash.
No, I think you're right. I mean, just because we're going to talk about that for a moment, I talked earlier. I like Trevor Cahill tonight. He's super high upside, good K per 9 versus righties. Miami's righty type lineup. Has some walking and control issues, but 60% ground ball rate, like Cahill. And, another play that I don't mind tonight, obviously the Shane Green is nice, plug and play, 5,800 in your GPPs. Look at Daniel Norris. Kid's a stud. He's young, he's a stud. You can load up on any bat you want, and just note that is GPP only. Full disclosure, huge sign, stop sign, GPP only. Cash games, Carrasco, Harvey, Arrieta. Write those three names down. If you have a cheat code, put Carrasco and Harvey at pitchers, and maybe put your shortstop as Arrieta. If you can't do that, go ahead and go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel Norris, led the minors in strikeouts per 9 innings last year, so big upside with him. Did give up a couple homers in his first game, but at the same time, if he can keep that ball on the ground, he's got a lead upside, and not a whole lot of guys in that Tampa Bay lineup outside of Evan Longoria that really strike fear in the heart of any opposing pitchers. So I like that call definitely at 5,600 for GPPs. All right, moving on here to catcher, where I'm going to continue to target A.J. Burnett, and especially with left-handed hitting where I can. Alex Avila should be batting right around 7th, which you don't love for cash games, but what you do love is, like I mentioned, the 350 will allowed to lefties by A.J. Burnett. So looking for a cheap guy, I'm just going to go ahead and slot Avila in my lineup.
Yeah, slot him in. Be happy with that because it's a great play. I went opposite route for this. Put Buster Posey. I think clearly number one catcher. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, not even close.
Number one catcher. And the fact that he said not even close makes you show there's a positional advantage to maybe playing up for catcher tonight. And we can say that about a couple positions. But I decided to go catcher Buster Posey since I did punt tremendously with Anthony Recker on my FanDuel.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and it's not that difficult to get those guys in on DraftKings, like we mentioned, and you'll kind of see the guys that we were able to fit into our lineups today accordingly. So with that being said, this next guy, we already talked about him. He was a lock on FanDuel. He's a lock for me on DraftKings, but with the positional eligibility flexibility that you have at DraftKings, you can play him at first or third. I elected to go Miguel Cabrera at first base here.
Can you play him at both first and third?
I wish you could. I would pay extra. Double buy-in entry fee.
I would actually pay. I would pay extra to play Miguel Cabrera at first, second, third, short, outfield with our three pitchers. But we cannot do that. I have Miguel Cabrera at first base as well tonight. He's 4,900. When we're talking about this, let's make an example for you guys. He's 4,900. Let's look at other players in that price range. Prince Fielder, Jacoby Ellsbury, Troy Tulowitzki, Adrian Beltre, Cole Calhoun, George Springer is more than him, Paul Goldschmidt, Rizzo, Jose Reyes. The list goes on. Josh Donaldson.
Yeah.
Miguel Cabrera is underpriced on DraftKings more so than FanDuel. He is a 100% lock. So I understand if you get cute on FanDuel, maybe, not really. DraftKings, just plug him in. Be done with it. And decide who you like. If you like a first baseman, say you like Rizzo tonight. Say you like Rizzo, maybe Pedro Alvarez. I don't know. You like a first baseman. Edwin Encarnacion. Plug him in, and then make sure you put Miggy in third base. His eligibility makes him powerful.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. And just even further to that point, if you look just at first base, Prince Fielder's the same price. Chris Carter, who's 1 for 26 on the season, is $200 less than Miguel Cabrera. So take advantage. DraftKings has been really stiff with their pricing this year. I love it. They've been keeping a lot of guys away from being able to stack Coors Field and other huge totals. But tonight's a night where you can get a guy like Cabrera at a significant discount. And if you don't, I hope you play me head-to-head. That's all I got to say about that. All right, moving on to second base here. I'm going with the guy we already mentioned on the other podcast, or the other lineup. It's Yangervis Solarte. You can play him at second base or third base on DraftKings. He's listed at just $3,000. Not quite a minimum salary, but very, very cheap for Solarte. And, it's another guy. I'm going to find a way to get him into my cash game lineups, either at second or third at that price, because another example of that is some guys right around that price, bench players, guys who are platoon players. Not a lot of guys who could be hitting second in the lineup tonight in a fine matchup like Solarte.
Yep, Solarte's in for me. Not too much to say. Ditto to everything the Big Italy mentioned.
All right, moving on to third base where we do have some options. Already mentioned you can play Solarte there if you'd like. My top option if I'm paying up is Evan Longoria against the lefty, as he usually will be at third base if he's facing a lefty. Yes, it's Daniel Norris, so obviously if you're playing him, you wouldn't be playing him in a cash game anyway. But if you're playing him, make sure you're not playing hitters against him, especially on DraftKings with negatives for hits and walks. But Evan Longoria is my selection here. I don't mind paying down to some other guys. Like you got your David Freese at $4,000. Jake Lamb, more of a tournament play, but he's a guy that I like as well at $3,600. And like I said, if you have a second baseman like you want to pay up for his Zobrist, go ahead and slot Solarte in at third base. But for me, it's going to be Evan Longoria. Easy to fit some big bats, and I don't mind paying for him tonight.
So I feel bad. We are agreeing on this. Longo, I think he's in a fine matchup tonight. Good floor. Norris is young, which always means capabilities to explode. And also Longo's he's just solid. That's a good way to describe him. He's just a solid baseball player. Good cash game player. Longo's locked in for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you some other options in case you're paying up but you don't want to go Longo. Adrian Beltre is not in a bad spot at $4,900. I don't know that I necessarily want to pay his price. But despite the fact that he hasn't been hitting the ball particularly well, I mean, he's still got a solid floor. Facing off against a rookie pitcher today, he's got upside in that ballpark. So I don't mind him. But if I'm going to be different, it's going to be in a tournament. I'm not going on my way to be contrarian in my cash game. All right, here we are at shortstop, where you'll hear his name every day that he's playing. Not the most expensive shortstop today at DraftKings. Like he is pretty much every other day. Obviously not playing in Coors Field. He's in San Francisco against Tim Hudson, who at one point was a great pitcher. Still a fine pitcher, but a guy that you can target with a couple bats. Troy Tulowitzki at $4,800. If you can afford him, don't mind him at all. But I don't think it's necessary to pay up for him. I do like D. Gordon a great deal in this spot here. If you could afford him, he's got the stolen base upside. He's got a nice floor with guys like Giancarlo Stanton, Christian Yelich behind him in the order. But with that being said, I'm not going to be paying for him. I'm going to be going down to Joe Panik, who we know is a second baseman, but you can get him at shortstop on DraftKings here. And he's batting right ahead of Buster Posey, some other big bats. So I'm actually a big fan of his tonight at shortstop at $3,200.
Yeah, completely. I went a different route. Alex, not Vladimir Guerrero at my shortstop play tonight, $2,600. He's got a good batting order. He's cheap. He's shown some potential, some upside, and I don't love shortstop tonight. I will say this: I didn't realize that Tulo was $4,800 on DraftKings right away. That price is very enticing because of his advantage over the rest. I do not mind whatsoever if you go Miguel and Tulo, which is definitely a very feasible. Very feasible.
Yeah, and as you'll see once we get to the outfield, I've got a couple of big bats in mind. I'm sure you've got some big bats in yours as well. One other guy I'll highlight here, I talked about him on the FanDuel podcast, assuming he's batting second. A lot of the Indians struggle with left-handed pitching. Jose Ramirez, not as much. So being a switch hitter, if he's in the two-hole, he's a nice pivot off of Joe Panik there at 32. All right, moving on to the outfield here, where I wanted him on FanDuel. I couldn't afford him. Easily fit into my lineup here, and that's Adam Jones at $4,600. Mention the matchup against CC Sabathia. I'll mention the matchup against him against any lefty, and I'll take Adam Jones in that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I plan on starting my cash game lineup tonight on DraftKings with 90s hit song from the Counting Crows. Mr. Jones and Me is going to be my first pick for
Sing
tonight. Mr. Jones and Me.
All right.
So,
not bad.
We're gonna plug in Mr. Jones, and then we're gonna plug in his younger, not so much brother is Steve Pearce. So I love those two bats for cash games against CC. The upside of both of them, as well as their floor, I can't say enough how much I love that combo together. They're great by they're good by themselves, but they're better together.
Yeah.
So love those two in the outfield. I guess I'll finish off my outfield. Anthony, I'm not a goose, I'm goes. So loving him as well at outfield. I mean, we're trying to add a little bit of fun to this for you guys as well too. Just know these players, we're giving you elite plays tonight. The outfield is going to be the best place to, I guess, get creative. So we're going to get creative with it with you guys. I mean, goes, he bats leadoff, good matchup, big bats behind him. We talked about Mickey. Steve Pearce, Adam Jones. I know that Justin's got some other plays as well in the outfield.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you on Pierce. And another great thing about Pierce is if you decide to play Miggy at third base, you can play Pierce at first base. He's got that dual eligibility on DraftKings, so got to like that a lot. Easy to get him paired up with Adam Jones if you like, which is a combo that I'm a big fan of as well. And like you mentioned, Anthony Gose, $3,500, lead off. Burnett can't touch lefties, and goes in a good spot leading off there. That ridiculously low price tag at $3,500. He's one of the guys that will certainly be locked into my cash games. And I'm going to give you some more plays, some other options at outfield once I finish off my last guy. And if you know me, you know this isn't any surprise. Corey Dickerson against a righty. Yes, please. Best in the league last year. Off to a fine start this year. Of course, you prefer him in Coors, but good luck affording him in Coors on DraftKings. He was $6,000 last time. So I'm going to take the discount where I can with a guy that mashes right-handed pitching against Tim Hudson at $4,800 to round out my lineup.
Love it.
All right, let's go ahead and talk. We got a few more minutes here. We're going to talk about a couple of other options, some pivots. So since outfield is obviously the deepest pool, you've got to roster 3 different outfielders. We kind of touched on some alternatives at some other positions. Here's a guy that I want to highlight. I talked about him in the other podcast, Mark Canha, first base or outfield eligible. He's at $3,400. Wouldn't play him over Miggy, but I'm saying if you want a pivot, a guy in a good spot in a great matchup, hitting high in the order, pivot off goes to him. You could put him in instead of one of the other big bats, maybe bump up your shortstop to Troy Tulowitzki. A lot of flexibility that he provides there for you as well.
And I'm gonna bring something up here. So DraftKings has multiple position eligibility, so utilize this. So what do I mean? Right now, we gave you our lineups earlier. I had Steve Pearce, Miguel Cabrera, Longoria. Now, with doing that, what we can do is plug in Steve Pearce at first base, pivot to Miguel Cabrera at third base, and because I'm not going to play Longo, who's $4,600, I can upgrade essentially my shortstop to Troy Tulowitzki, who's $4,800. When you talk to yourself and say, Longoria, $4,600, Troy Tulowitzki, $4,800, ask yourself, who would you rather have at the same price? If they could all play the same position, if you're playing 9 players and you're playing all the same position, doesn't matter, all utility, who are you going to play, Troy Tulowitzki or Evan Longoria? Really tinker with your cash game lineups because you'd be surprised by, a couple pivots from your first baseman to third base, then first base to outfield. If you move things around, you can get what you want a majority of the time, and I guarantee you your first lineup isn't going to be your best.
Yeah, and a lot of flexibility, like you mentioned on DraftKings, and I like that strategy a lot. And another thing to consider is the positional scarcity, where we mentioned how bad shortstop is today. You can afford Troy Tulowitzki at shortstop on DraftKings. It makes sense to go ahead and get him because, yes, Longoria is my favorite play at third base, and I'm sure he will be for a lot of people. But, yeah, and you agree, but at the same time, there are other options at third base that you can play that are similar, maybe not quite as good as Longoria in this spot. But if you pivot down from him and you bump your shortstop up to Troy Tulowitzki, you get yourself, hands down, the best shortstop in the game in any situation. So you got to like that right there. But like I said, yeah, absolutely take advantage of these flexibilities here, especially the first base and outfield. There's a lot of guys that are first base and outfield eligible tonight. And you got Ben Zobrist, second base and outfield eligibility. He's another guy that I would consider for my cash games. Like, say if you put him at second, you could move Solarte over to third base, keep your Miggy at first base. And with that being said, there's only a few other people we'll really touch on here. If you want to go with some cheap guys, I'm going through the bottom here for some guys that I think may actually be in play in the outfield. And there's not a lot to like. I mean, you've got mostly the cheap guys, 2,500 or less, unless you see one of them really high in an order that we're not going to see until later. Not a guy I'm going to force in. But you've got Ender Inciarte at $3,300. I mentioned him before. I think he's in a fine spot today. Should be batting near the top of the order. So if you want a cheap pivot, you can go down that way. But outside of that, I'm really not going to force cheap outfitters into my lineup because they're easy to fit, and there's a lot of top options I really want to get some exposure to tonight.
Yeah, no. I mean, well put. I agree with all of that.
All right, well, with that, that's going to pretty much wrap things up for us here today on the Premium Podcast, talking DraftKings and FanDuel cash game strategy. Hopefully we helped you out, give you a little bit of idea what you're looking for with your high floors. Try to incorporate some ceiling, also some stability with your starting pitchers, which are absolutely essential in daily fantasy baseball. And with that, We are out of here. We will see you guys again tomorrow. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.